Welcome to Frost & Sullivan's Growth, Innovation, Human Replacement, or Collaboration. Our presenter today is Vinay Venkatesen, Research Consultant, and also co-presenting is Jillian Walker, Principal Consultant, part of our Visionary Innovation group here at Frost & Sullivan. And it's our pleasure to have our guest panelist, Aruna Ravichadrawan, VP CMO Global Marketing from Cisco, and Charles Towers Clark, Chairman Pod Group, and also a Forbes contributor. With that, I would now like to hand the presentation over to Vinay.
Thank you so much, Anna. Welcome to everyone dialed into the briefing today. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Vinay Venkatesen from the Visionary Innovation Group at Frost & Sullivan. So to set the context today for today's discussion, let me first start by first introducing you to our megatrends universe. We as a team track 30 megatrends on a day-to-day basis across a broad range of social, technology, as well as industries. While these are extremely relevant, it is the convergence and the resultant transformation of these trends that we find so exciting. And one such transformation that we have noticed over the past few years and going into the next 5 to 10 years is the evolution and future of work, which is expected to have an effect on several businesses listening in today. Which brings us to 3 major shifts that we are going to talk about today. The first one is our future workplace technology, including AI and automation that will affect our future workplace. Our future labor workforce, which will be influenced by social trends such as generational shifts and an increasingly stronger women workforce. And finally, our future workspace, which will be influenced by the changing work environment, work cultures, and business models. So let's dive right into the first transformation here, our future workplace technology. As you can see here on the screen, we have underlined 5 key shifts. The first one is AI leading to job polarization. So while we see that there are several technologies that are expected to transform our workplace, AI remains the most sought after, even in terms of investment and implementation, as we will increasingly see machines and systems as part of our daily lives thanks to AI. It will also lead to job polarization, which essentially means that the high-skilled jobs which require human-level intelligence will be going on the rise, whereas the low-skilled jobs, which become too expensive to automate, will also see a margin increase. But what this will result in is the hallowing of the middle ground jobs, which we will see in the next couple of slides. The second point brings us to the connectivity and convergence of multiple communication devices and IoT systems, which will further empower this digital transformation in the workplace. This will essentially enable us to thrive in a unified and collaborative environment, promising opportunities for edge computing, integrated communications, and adaptability to BYOD trends. The third point here, as we see, is seamless human-machine interfaces, which will be able to perform multiple tasks, ensuring employee safety, trainability, and task repurposing. Point number 4 here is the professional service robots deployed as a robotics as a service model, or the the need for high capital investment, which can be most favorable for the SMEs. And the final point here is the virtually enhanced work environment, wherein augmented, virtual, and mixed reality will enable an enhanced telepresence, great freedom of movement, and virtual co-location of the workforce. Let's dive into slide 5 here, which talks about AI, which leads to job polarization. Now, while improvements in AI will drive technological advancements in areas such as computing and natural language processing, it will also lead to this kind of job polarization. If we consider polarization across the U.S., throughout the ages, we can basically observe that the percentage of higher skilled jobs, we mean doctors or engineers or journalists or even paramedics, which has risen through the IT revolution in 2012 and will continue to rise through the AI revolution to 2030. In comparison, routine middle-skilled jobs, have been rapidly shrinking and will continue to do so as they become extensively automated. Now, the lower skill jobs, which are too expensive to automate, will continue to increase marginally. Now, what does this mean? a digital native Gen Z population, as well as a digital Gen Z population, which will be prepared to work alongside AI, but the pressure of a rapidly shifting environment will drive focus towards a newer array of skill sets. Now, in 2030, as we can see to the right, skills that require emotional intelligence and creativity. In other words, those which cannot be easily automated or replaced by automation will gain prominence. And perhaps one of the most critical ones here listed to your right here could be STEM related, as these are highly complex and also difficult to automate. Now, building a STEM capable workforce will provide a path to reliable and lucrative work opportunities moving forward. And we're also moving towards a highly connected world. As per our recent estimates, there will be over 7 billion connected devices, actually 7 connected devices per human by 2025, and culminating into a complex network of almost 72 billion connected devices over the next 5-year period. Now, the need to connect anytime, anywhere, from any device or any application basically provides an emerging need for low latency processing and mobile bandwidth optimization. Now, the combined power of 5G and edge computing will actually deliver this kind of seamless user interface moving forward. Now, what does that essentially mean? So to your right, we have provided a traffic system example, which is a pretty simple example, which shows that edge computing can almost instantaneously analyze data in real time, almost within milliseconds to prevent accidents. Now, let's think about this from the perspective of an industrial environment. In a plant floor processing environment, which typically requires high speed response and high volume of data inputs, being able to detect these kind of anomalies and actually respond to real time can pretty much avoid significant downtime and also achieve higher productivity. So unified collaboration and communication, which is more customized and integrated, is going to be definitely a very interesting transformation to look at from a future of work perspective. So how will the evolution of industrial human-machine interfaces evolve itself? Now, the future of robotics and their successful integration in the workplace, we believe, primarily depends on 2 key factors. The first one is safety, and the other is ease of use. Now, as shown in the diagram, as robots are increasingly introduced into a diverse set of applications and deployed to work closely with humans, we will start to see a higher degree of motion compliance and sensors, wherein robots are able to monitor a more safeguarded space and slow down their operation speed if they actually detect a human nearby, which ensures full safety and human control. A great example that I could state is how robots ensuring human safety are being used in this hub called ORCA, which is the Offshore Robotics for Certification of Assets. So now ORCA has actually built a fully autonomous robot to inspect damaged offshore wind farms. Now, what this essentially means is that this could put an end to the risk of having humans who are harnessed to suspend themselves over the sea to inspect these turbines, which is a highly unsafe environment to work in. Now, and not only that, but actually building fully trainable and reprogrammable robots will be a critical determinant to ensure this high level of human-machine integration. And this will be regardless of the industry of what the robots are used into. It could be industrial workplace, it could be professional, or it could be personal robots. The other advancement which will take on enterprise complexity is the use of digital personal assistants in the workplace. While today we are all familiar with numerous companies which have deployed chatbots as the first line of customer service, these are expected to get more intelligent over time. Some future advancements we can see or expect are their ability to provide data visualization or a summary of data that recommendations to the user, as well as identification of appropriate receivers of information, which is essentially selective information pushing. Finally, we come to work wearables, which will also constitute a significant part of the workplace technology evolution. As we also now moving towards a connected environment, we'll see wearables such as, we are already very well versed with smart bands, smart watches, and now smart glasses, which will be increasingly adopted in the future workplace. A great example is how Google has now introduced a newer version of its Google Glass, but now it's called the Enterprise Edition 2, primarily targeted at enterprises, even surgeons, factory workers, and other professionals. So we're not too far behind, when we see more and more employers use this kind of fitness trackers and, implants even to track metrics in order to improve preventative care for their employees and even, help reduce their healthcare costs collectively. On the other hand, digital reality itself will radically change how people experience work, providing these kind of virtual overlays of information onto the real world. Augmented reality or virtual reality will actually help us make interactions amongst workers as well as objects more insightful. And imagine a time in the not so far future when you're typically able to attend this webinar session, or a conference and just watch me presenting live through your VR headsets, or a holographic telepresence, which can allow remote workers and clients to attend meetings through a virtual, media presence. Wearable AR can also provide information, such as instructions or notes through, head-mounted displays. So how relevant is this to the future workplace? Think about a manufacturing workshop, where an AR can actually provide critical information about the factory floor and reduce these kinds of errors significantly. Virtual reality can be used for training workers and alert them of unsafe working conditions. There are companies which are already taking advantages of such technologies at the workplace. Or even in healthcare, digital reality could actually provide direct visual feedback, for enhanced instructions during a surgery. Consider the automotive industry, where companies like Volkswagen, for example, are using AR for real-time diagnosis, repair, and service. Companies like Ford and BMW are also looking at vehicle design and prototyping using holograms for real-time collaboration. But the caveat is there are also challenges to this, that companies must be aware that more wearables or implants inevitably also means that there are more data points which will be generated. And excessive tracking or improper tracking could actually result in a kind of a big brother scenario, which would be detrimental to the employee mindset. So clearly setting boundaries for tracking employee metrics and complete transparency will be critical, as we implement these technologies in the workplace. Now, with that, we'd like to invite our panelists to, weigh in with their observations on what are the transformations happening around, this workplace technology. We have a few questions up here, but it would be great to have a broader view of what we presented here. So, Aruna and Charles, what are your thoughts around the tech advancements that we see around us? What opportunities do they present to us, or even better, how can companies really know how they're ready to handle this kind of transformation? Aruna, do you want to go first?
Hey, thank you, Vinay. So from what we are actually observing when you think about future of workplace from a technology perspective are in two critical areas. One is there is a huge increase in the concept of virtual assistants. So if you think about it, AI has basically changed the way people actually interact across the board. I'll just give you an example. Previously, when I would actually come into the office and join a meeting, you have to, put in those mundane numbers and you have to join a meeting after 5 or 10 minutes. But as you look at how technology has actually advanced and how it improved the employee productivity across the board, this is where AI, in terms of virtual assistants, in terms of facial recognition, is actually going to play a tremendous role. So my meeting experience has now changed tremendously. So all I have to do is, if I have to join a a meeting on the phone while driving into the office, and then I come into my office, my WebEx board will automatically recognize who I am, and it'll switch over the call directly from my mobile device onto the WebEx board. So that's one example in terms of how AI is further enabling and automating the employee productivity. Another example is there is a huge rise in terms of facial recognition as well as voice assistant. So again, if I'm huddled in my office working with my coworkers, the WebEx board actually wakes up and say, hey, Aruna, you have a meeting starting in 5 minutes. Do you actually want to join the meeting? And so even without having to lift a finger, you actually have the opportunity to, be a part of the conversation with the meeting. And as I look into the future, in terms of how this is further going to change, is that if you are about to join a meeting, not only will it prompt you, you can actually have a conversation with a lot of the virtual assistants, just like you have a conversation with Alexa and Siri and so on and so forth. You can actually say, hey, tell me how many people have joined the meeting. Can you please load the presentation from your last conversation into the meeting? So a lot of the things which had to be done manually across the board is now going to be automated by a lot of the virtual assistants. The second area where I think we are seeing a big amount of increase in cadence is around the whole concept of audio as well as speech recognition. And so gone are the days like, when you are joining a meeting or you're collaborating with your peers, most of the conversations were actually recorded. But now, you have to take, the technology gives us the ability to take it to the next level. It's not just about recording the conversation, it's about transcribing it. And it's not just transcribing it, it's transcribing it in any language across the board. You should be able to tell your voice assistant to basically take meeting notes. You should be able to tell your voice assistant to be able to take an action item. And then later on, after you've finished your collaboration or you've finished your meeting, you can actually go into the cloud, put a keyword search on whatever you want. You can look up any one of the transcription over the last couple of weeks or months or years. In fact, if you want to basically go back in time. And so all of this, when you think about the whole concept of collaboration assistance, facial recognition, audio as well as speech recognition, I think, it's all focused on being able to further automate a lot of tasks which were manual and further increase the employee productivity across the board. The second area where I see there is a lot of transformation which is happening is in the AR/VR world. So, and there are a lot of examples, and I think you stated a couple of them from Ford. So with Ford, their global teams have the opportunity to optimize their vehicle design on an Oculus Rift. And so how do you do that? So basically, if you are trying to, do something, design your particular car without even actually getting into the underlying mechanics, you can actually do it with AR/VR. And there are other companies which are actually simulating in multiple different verticals. At UCLA, they have an Oculus surgical theater where they can actually teach sensitive new surgeries across the board. Think about how much of a value that will actually provide to the world if you can have the ability to teach new surgeries for various different surgeons around the world using AR/VR technology. With NASA, they actually train the astronauts with zero-G virtual reality. Boeing, they use AR to actually build airplanes so that they can actually cut the error rates by 50%. So again, the whole concept of AR/VR is actually going to take the future of work into the next technology level.
Absolutely. Those are very interesting examples. Thank you so much, Aruna, for sharing. Charles, would you like to add to that? Would you like to add your perspective?
I think I'm going to come from a very different perspective to Aruna, and as you say, they're a great example. But if we look at the questions which you put out and to try and answer some of those questions, especially around the idea of tech readiness, our company's tech readiness, have they undertaken a tech readiness assessment? The problem there, I think, is the question's wrong. I think the question really should be more about, are we tech ready flexible? And do we have systems in place? Are we agile enough? Are we using continuous integration, continuous development type tools, not just in the development side, to be ready for what the future is going to throw at us? Because if you're ready for a technology now, then it's probably too late and it's probably already moved on. So that's the first question you asked there. If we take a bigger step in terms of your third question, what extent will robotics and automation impact the future workplace? This is something which I actually wrote a book about called The Way of CEO. And I do think it's going to have a very, very huge impact over the next 5 to 15 years. You've gone through, obviously, the impact of AI, and it's not general intelligence, artificial general intelligence that's going to have the impact. It's the machine learning and the deep learning focusing on narrow and deep problems. And the way I put it in my book is we can look at what can be processed, and things can be broken down into smaller steps. And if it can be processed, then it can be automated. But we also need to look wider. Professor Stuart Russell from the University of California has talked about the need to address the implications of AI, and that obviously comes back into the future of the workplace as well. And in a similar way to climate change, where we could have dealt with this 5, 10, 15 years, 30 years ago, and it's going to cost us a lot less than it was going to cost us now, the implications of AI on society and in the workplace as well are such that I think we really need to be looking at how it's going to affect employees, how it's going to affect companies. And you mentioned earlier on the human skills that we're going to be requiring. And I think one of the problems which we have at the moment is that companies are not set up to allow employees to have the right mindset to be able to deal with what will be the future of work in terms of dealing with AI and dealing with automation. 2 years ago, I started to look at this threat, and I changed my company around by creating an environment where I was encouraging people to take the initiative and to take responsibility for what they're doing. And so some of the initiatives that I took was to make all the information available to everybody in the company, including the salaries, let people work where and when they want, let people choose their own salaries. Now, those may seem as gimmicks in a workplace, but I think it's extremely important for the future to deal with AI and to deal with automation, moving told to do or a process to one where they're thinking, and you alluded to this earlier on, where they're thinking and they're working out, well, not only what are their objectives, but also what are the objectives that they need to set for the automation.
Absolutely. And if you were to underline, key issues that companies must consider while integrating these technologies, what would those be, Charles?
Again, I think I'm going to slightly, forgive me, but I'm going to slightly repeat what I just said. Is that you can integrate the technology, but the technology is not going to work, and especially automation, bringing new technology in, which is going to automate things, is not going to work unless you've got to a situation where people have the right mindset to be able to deal with the technology. And that's not doing process work, that's doing thinking work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Aruna, your thoughts on how automation could actually impact and any key issues that you think companies must consider when integrating these technologies?
Yeah, so I think I covered the automation part, right? So when I talked about employee productivity with the virtual assistants, with the AR, VR, that is where they're going to have the biggest impact, because it's automating a lot of the tasks which were actually, mundane and manual across the board. But I'll focus on the second part with respect to the key issues. While AI is going to bring about tremendous amount of automation and augment people in terms of being able to facilitate collaboration and make it happen much more better, I would say some of the key issues it's actually going to bring from a technology perspective is about security. Right? So because as the whole thing evolves, so the data privacy is a very big concept. So if you want to actually have facial recognition, how are you actually, you have to think about, are you going to be able to store the people profiles? Right? And so data privacy being so huge, there are so many different compliance mandates. So while the AI and the automation is going to help, Security needs to be thought about. People need to give consideration to that. If not, it's going to open up a lot of breaches across the board. And then the second issue where I actually see is about the evolving deployment architecture. So while you had it in one of your slides, right? So by 2030, you actually mentioned that the various different UC systems will basically have a seamless user interface. Why is that important? Because you want to provide one single unified experience across the board, regardless of which collaboration platform from a technology perspective you're actually using. But what you see currently today is every one of the collaboration systems solutions, whether you want to call, message, or meet someone, or whether you want to have collaboration to facilitate, in order to facilitate a fantastic customer experience across the board, they all have come with their own, multiple panes of glass. So the other issue I see is if you want to really automate and provide that seamless experience in terms of collaboration, whether you want to call, message, or meet anyone across the board, how can you actually do it given the evolving deployment models? Because your architectures could be on-prem, it could be in a hybrid deployment model, or it could be in the cloud. And every one of them could have their own user interface. It could have its own security. So the holy nirvana in my mind in terms of an issue is how do you actually bring all of those together so that you don't compromise security and you have the ability to provide that seamless, unified customer experience and user experience.
Very true, very true. I think data privacy will be critical to, towards these digital transformations that we see. Thank you both. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Jillian to discuss our future labor workforce. Jillian?
Thanks, Vinay. And so I'm going to just inject a little bit more of the human element here today and speak a little bit to the future workforce. As you can see on your screen, the key shifts that will become increasingly prominent over the next decade include things like the dominance of multi-generational workforces. And now, clearly, this is something that we've always had to some extent, that is more than one generation in the workforce. But we'll see, I think, a broader range in the future. You can imagine Gen Z, millennials, Gen Xers, boomers, and maybe even those in generations beyond boomers, all working together in one collaborative process. And this multi-generational outlook will certainly create challenges, I think, in terms of communicating and interacting across generations, but also tremendous opportunities. The second point here is the rise of median ages globally, which is ultimately a contributor to this concept of a multi-generational workforce, but also things like considerations around as societies age, people are going to be working longer. What does that mean? The third point here is the number of women in the workplace, and that will continue to grow. Here in the U.S., it was, I think, just announced that more women than men are actually receiving college degrees. So women are now in the majority in terms of college degrees, and that's just one example of how we'll see women continue to accelerate their place in the workplace. This shift is, again, one indicator of the rise of working women, and that will have implications, I think, particularly around policies. We think of things like pay, but also family leave and implications around that. And then finally, integration of robotics and automation. So just kind of dovetailing off some of the topics we were just talking about. And that will, of course, have profound impacts on the workforce of the future. I think, as Vinay had hit on, particularly in terms of needed worker skill sets. So moving on to our first slide in this section, an aging workforce will mean, I think, ultimately at the end of the day, postponing retirement, but have all the other implications as well. The chart you see on your screen highlights a few points. First, you'll see countries segmented by sort of aging groups. You'll notice that particularly in developed countries, the aging population, and here we're qualifying that as 65 plus, will grow to over 15% of the population. In some countries like Japan, that will approach 30% of the population. But also, just to highlight the fact that this is not just a developed world issue, countries like China, its massive population was also going to see a rise in the aging population. In fact, the numbers attached to each of the bubbles that you see in the chart show the percentage point growth in older age dependency ratios. So that just simply means that there's going to be more people over 65 when compared to the population of prime working age people. So I think the question is, why is this important specifically to the future workforce? Well, first, there's the point we brought up about multi-generational workforces and the opportunities and challenges of having so many generations as coworkers. But there are also implications around the need to work longer. So we see retirement age being pushed further in many countries, as well as catering to the needs of older populations, whether that is in the types of jobs that will expand, for instance, things like elder care, or even flexibility around older workers in the workplace who may have to care for grandchildren or even older parents beyond them, or medical emergencies. So certainly healthcare and worker wellness is going to be a greater focus as well. Moving on to the next slide here, our next topic in the future workforce is the growth of women workers. In many developed countries, female worker participation rates of prime age workers has been over 70% for some time, but this is also the case in many developing countries as well. And as populations age, we will increasingly need more women to join the labor force to help support that older population. I think Japan, again, has been the perfect test bed for this, where policies aimed at bringing more women into full-time and regular work, so not just kind of part-time and intermittent work, but full-time regular work is increasingly a goal. And there's no sense that this trend is going to slow as women become better educated globally and as policies continue to target improving the status of women in the workplace. Now, this means a few things. First, hopefully more economic independence for women, which in turn will drive products and services aimed at women. But more specifically, I think to our topic at hand today, it means a rethinking in terms of the workplace in terms of women. So a greater emphasis on closing pay gaps, on including women in senior positions, on valuing the unique experience and perspective women bring to a work environment. So even rethinking workplace skills like differences between how women and men might approach topics like negotiation or applying for positions. So things around mentoring women, on creating workplaces that are friendly to the realities of women's lives, such as flexibility for maternity leave and parental obligations. And ultimately, I think this is going to have be a boon for men as well, who will also benefit from these sorts of policy shifts. So finally, just touching on automation and robotics in the workplace, as this topic pertains specifically to the future workforce. And of course, the main concern here is worker displacement. So the matrix you see on your screen isolates jobs that are seeing shortages in workers and that could see increasing amounts of automation or replacement or supplementary activities by robotics or robotic automation over the coming decade. So you're looking at the bottom right-hand box here on your chart. Areas like agriculture or truck driving, for instance. I think what we really want to consider with this topic is how robotics and automation are ultimately going to impact those skill sets of workers. So in some cases, automation is going to contribute to de-skilling trends. So no longer will an employee need to have, let's say, a special degree or skill set to perform a job if automation can perform basically the technical heavy lifting. This then has implications for worker pay because de-skilled workers command less in salary. On the other hand, in some areas, this trend can result in the need for even higher skill sets as automation replaces, let's say, entry, for instance, marked out here in that quadrant. Automating this job or a job that something like an intern might do may make it harder for new workers to get a foot in the door somewhere, or may make it take longer for those workers to acquire the needed skills they have to progress in their careers. So with these thoughts in mind, I want to give plenty of room for our panelists to discuss their thoughts on the future workforce. just a few questions to pose, but really open to how they want to respond to what we presented. So Aruna and Charles, what are your thoughts on Gen Z, aging workforces, multi-generational workforces, and then where does automation fit in when considering these topics? And then, of course, bringing in the concern of women in the workforce. So Aruna, I'll let you go ahead and speak to these topics, and then we'll turn to Charles.
Okay, so when I think about the workforce, I break it into the quad generational workforce, right? So you have the baby boomers, the Gen X, the millennials, and the Gen Z. And every one of the four generations have different motivations, different values, and different work styles. So if you think about the baby boomers, their value system is actually defined by their work, and their work style is that they actually value face time. And then if you think about Generation X, their values are that they value work-life balance, and they don't actually need or want face time. It's significantly different when you think about baby boomers versus Gen X. And then you come to the millennial generation. For them, work must happen. Work should be an integral part of their life, and they need to be able to influence. They need to have a social influence so that they can make the world much more better. So that is one of the core value systems when you think about the millennial generation. And then the last one, which is the Gen Z, and for them, it's much more of they only know the global diverse workforce and workplace. And for them, their preference in terms of work style is about being able to have conversations live or through video or visual. So they're very visual across the board. It's not about the audio. So as you can see, baby boomers and Gen Z actually value face time. And for baby boomers, it was physical face time. For the Generation Z, it could be video or visual, and it doesn't have to be live. So there is a significant difference as you basically see the changing value system as well as with respect to the work style. Given this, I would say automation is going to play a tremendous role because we still have, regardless of how the future is actually going to evolve, probably the baby boomers are actually going to drop out as we move towards 2025 or 2030, as you actually discussed. But you still have to support three generations as you move towards the future, which is Gen X, millennials, and the Gen Z. And you have to start with Gen Z, and same thing with the millennials. I think they'll make a significant part of the workforce. So when you think about their work style and their value system, automation is going to play a tremendous role. And then how the evolving workspace is currently evolving is also going to play a tremendous workplace. So let me give a tactical example. So given the rise of mobility, and given the rise of flexibility, and given the rise of the preference in terms of how millennial and the Gen Z generation actually operate, where you actually work needs to become irrelevant. It means that technology needs to automate a lot of the various different things so that you can still provide that face-to-face communication. So we talked about AI, like in the earlier part of the discussion, I talked about the rise of facial recognition, the rise of virtual, the rise of will actually augment the value system and the work style which the millennial as well as the Gen Z population actually expect. And then given the rise of AR, VR, it'll further continue to supplement in terms of how the various different quad generational workforce will actually operate in an environment. And last but not the least, right, so we went from, a static workplace with large conference rooms where people used to come in to work, with the baby boomers, down to an agile workforce or a very mobile workforce, where that has given a rise to this whole concept called huddle spaces. More and more companies are actually investing in huddle spaces, which are not dedicated spaces or conference rooms. They need to have the underlying technology in order to facilitate all of the goodness and greatness which is coming with AI as well as AR and VR. And then the new emerging trend is the shared workspaces, right? So we have seen a couple of different companies who are actually offering that particular business model across the board so that people can work where they want, they can be mobile, and they should still be able to facilitate their preference in terms of having the face-to-face communication across the board. So both the technology is evolving in order to support that, the workspace is evolving in order to support the various different work styles which are happening in the market.
Great, thank you so much. And then I want to go to Charles quickly to get his thoughts on any of these topics here. So multi-generational workforce, automation, or women in the workforce.
Thanks. I think Aruna very brilliantly summed up the different generational aspects. If I can just put it a slightly different angle on that, would be that what I've seen is that the Generation Z and the younger generations are coming into companies expecting to have companies looking at what their needs are rather than what the company needs are. So companies, I think, need to change the way that they look at their employees from that aspect. When we come into automation and how that's going to displace, I would venture to guess that the biggest change is going to be on the aging population of the workplace. And one's got to remember that it's not roles that will get replaced; it's tasks within those roles that will get replaced. So it's going to be hard for that aging population, as you mentioned earlier on in your slides. The fact that there's going to be more older people are going to need to retire later. So companies are going to need to find a way to use the experience and wisdom, possibly to be able to take the processes that are going to be done by automation and find ways to make those more efficient with the experience that the older workers can bring. From the point of view of women, I think it's a huge opportunity. I'm really pleased on this side. I may be wrong, but I hope I'm not. I think it's a huge opportunity that the future brings for women, because we're going to, as I said earlier, we're going to need, and you alluded to it earlier as well, but we're going to need to use more of the human skills, of one of which was in your slide, or I think the known slide first of all, was emotional intelligence. There was a study done in 2016 across 90 countries, 55,000 professionals, and on various emotional intelligence competencies. And of 12 of them, women were better on 11, and on the 12th, they were fairly much the same. There's no difference between men and women, and the 12th was emotional self-control. So I do think that women have a great place to play in a world where things are getting automated, because they've got better skills in regards to communication, bringing teams together, and those skills, softer skills, which we're going to need more of.
Hey, can I add a comment to his, especially with respect to the women in the workforce? So I think, 100% agree to what Charles said. So once upon a time, right, like women had to decide whether they want to have a career or not, because if they didn't have the ability to work from home, they couldn't actually work. Look at the advancement in technology. Now a woman has an opportunity to pursue a career where she can actually work from home and raise her family while and meeting the needs of supporting her family as well as her kids, while at the same time she can basically work in technology. So women have the opportunity to work from home, and then even if they want to come into work, like as you see the way technology is actually advancing, all the offices are outfitted with all of the key things, like especially if you think about a nursing mother. Most companies actually give that opportunity for women to basically come into work or work from home, and which basically, shows that there is a rising trend in terms of being able to encourage more women workers. And we saw it in the slide you actually showed as well. But I also want to comment on one other topic. So according to McKinsey, if women actually participated in the global economy at the same rate as men, as much as $28 trillion or 26% would be added to the global annual GDP by 2025. Right? So there definitely is a role where women actually play when you look at it. Another example is for many profitable firms, a move from no female leaders to 30% representation is associated with 15% increase in net revenue margins. Cisco is a perfect example across the board. If you look at the transformation journey we have been on, especially in terms of ELT members under our CEO Chuck, right now he's got 50-50, representation of men versus women. And so again, I can say that, the technology is going to affect women in a very, very positive way and pave the way for many more jobs, which will then be translated into the results, which can be gotten out of having a very diverse workforce.
Okay, well, great. I know we're approaching quickly the top of the hour, so I'm going to hand it back to Vinay, but I don't want to lose sight of this gig economy question here because that is definitely a hot topic that we hear people wanting to know more about and where we see the future of that going. So we're going to put a pin in that and bring it into the next section. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Vinay to talk about the future workspace.
Thank you, Gillian. Thank you, Aruna and Charles, for your wonderful perspectives. So moving forward to the final section here, that's our future workspace. Two major shifts that we see will become increasingly significant. With the growing connectivity and technological innovation, companies will continue to embrace a hybridized remote workforce, and listing thoughts to that. The focus will also, majorly evolve around agility and scalability. Now, in order to attract talent, consider renters as well as employers, who will continue to gravitate towards more functional, smart building and open concept working environments. Think about a time when landlords are trying to deliver more on services than just the space, which was so long considered the sole asset. And employee wellness will also, come in as a key factor of consideration. Aruna was talking about, how women have evolved from a time when, you wouldn't have, these kind of situations which could help them, work remotely, and now we're moving towards, a more collaborative environment. So let's take a closer look at how these business models have been changing. Consider the matrix here on the slide. We basically plotted these changing models based on employment flexibility and skills flexibility. So to the bottom left, if you can see, companies which have traditionally relied on full-time, employees, but also now offer flexible working arrangements. The place of work still remains primarily an office space, although remote working is an option now. Low on employment flexibility and skills. Now, on the bottom right corner, we have companies like Uber or Lyft, wherein a group of workers, perform one function only. So not much employment flexibility in terms of place of work, but wider, skills to put to use. We have food delivery services, grocery shopping, food services as well. And on the top left, we have companies like Upwork, which provides a platform for skilled workers to find, one-off projects, irrespective of, place of work. It could be a home, office space, cafe, anywhere. High employment flexibility, but, really low in skills flexibility. And on the top right corner, we have, and probably this is where most innovation will occur, companies like Amazon's Mechanical Turk, which basically allows individuals to outsource smaller parts of workforce, fine, but high skills flexibility as well as very high employment flexibility. So what does this mean? I mean, this means that moving forward, organizations will be required to consider a more hybrid workforce based on their needs, which could cater to freelancers, those who prefer working from home based on their convenience, or entrepreneurs who would needs very high dependence on networking proximity, but traditional office spaces are not a requirement anymore. Remote or traveling workers, where you need to have a mix of office as well as remote working styles. Those who occasionally need access to meeting and conference rooms, and finally, SMEs and companies who would probably want a local operations center, but without very high upfront costs and operational costs of actually running the place. So I think the way that we could best put it is the way in how collaborative, collective, shared, or office on demand options will actually shape up over the next 5 to 10 years. And on the final slide here, what will future office spaces encompass? On one hand, we have, around 72 billion connected devices by 2025. And on the other hand, we have a growing building automation market, which combined will propel for great key themes that we are expecting to see. There could be embedded materials and sensors, which we could see in future office spaces, which are almost activated upon contact. I mean, a good example is a company called Energy Square. They actually introduced a wireless charging surface at the CES 2019. Now, the surface is basically a matrix of conductive tiles, and it's monitored by an embedded system. Long story short, it could detect your smartphone or laptop and charge it as soon as it's kept on the surface. I mean, there are quite a few bigger companies also looking into this tech, DuPont or even LG, for example. Connected systems. Now, building devices will be connected to form a smarter IoT ecosystem. Cisco's connected workplace, and I'm sure Aruna can elaborate on this a bit, help them, Cisco's connected system actually helped them shed almost 7.5 million square feet of office space, and just to basically result in high real estate cost savings as well as CO2 emissions, a more flexible yet connected workforce, more activity-based and collaborative workspaces. And finally, untethered workspaces. Now, smart building is based on personal convenience. A simple example would be just connected lighting systems, which could be activated by IoT sensors, basically to reduce energy consumption and space efficiency. And apart from these, there are some other innovations that could also be integrated. I mean, let's take an example of smart construction materials. Commercial spaces which are built with self-healing concrete could actually significantly improve the building lifespan and also reduce refurbishment costs because of its inherent ability to repair itself. Or even biofacades, used in glass panels, which can actually provide this kind of shade and reduce dependence on artificial heating, ventilation, and cooling. So to put it all together, what does this mean? With more employers embracing these kind of remote work styles and the gig economy coming up, it's only going to reduce office space occupancy and increasing real estate costs. So employers will increasingly consider commercial spaces which provide the maximum connectivity, collaboration and flexibility across, global locations to involve that level of employee engagement and productivity. And with that, I'd like to invite our panelists to, provide their perspectives on evolving workspaces. It'd be great if we could come back to that gig economy question because it's so relevant on this, on this section as well. There is a clear indication that employers will need to look beyond the traditional office spaces now. So what kind of changes do we see, occurring here? Charles, would you like to comment on that? And maybe then we can turn to Aruna.
Sure. Actually, if I can go on to the gig economy one first. I think the gig economy offers some huge opportunities, especially for those who are highly sought after or want flexibility. But there should be a huge nervousness as well around the threats that for those with multiple jobs and zero-hour contracts. It's very interesting looking at the difference between the EU and the US as to how the governments are viewing it and what protection they're putting in for the workers. But one of the other issues which is related to the gig economy, but related to automation as a whole, and one of the great dangers is regional differences. So you're going to see as it can be automated are going to be in areas where not necessarily the workers in those areas are going to have the skills to be able to take on other jobs. And the gig economy is not going to necessarily be able to offer a solution on that. Maybe while we're on the subject of the gig economy, I'll just hand straight back on to Aruna on whether she's got any remarks on that before going back to the others.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Charles. So the way I look at gig economy is that, so let me share the thought, right? So when you think about the gig economy, and especially in the quad generational workforce, so if you look at Gen Y, the average job length for a Gen Y is less than 3 years, right? So that is according to Forbes. The other thing which I see with respect to gig economy is that more and more large firms, I can speak for this, especially from Cisco perspective, are increasing their number of contractors. So according to Intuit, 80% of large firms are actually going to up the number of their contractors by the time you get to 2030. And last but not the least, 15% of freelancers actually earn via a digital platform. And again, speaking specifically for marketing, I can see a huge increase in the number of contractors. So you might be wondering, why is this important, right? So why do we see the rise of the gig economy? One is, it gives you flexibility. So you don't need to relocate, it gives you flexible, and it also gives you work-life balance. It's a 9-to-5 job. If you work more than 9 to 5, you're actually compensated over time for what you actually deliver towards any company. It's better than a salary, and it's a short-term relationship. And if you go back and relate it to the work styles for the millennials as well as the Gen Z population, which are going to make the significant part of our workforce by the time you get to 2030, I would say, like I said, Gen Y expects to be on a job for less than 3 years, which means that they're going to switch 15 to 20 jobs during their entire lifetime. And now if you translate that to the gig economy numbers, it means that, being a contractor will pay a bigger dividend for them because it'll give them the flexibility, it'll give them a better work-life balance, it's a short-term relationship, and it aligns with their particular work style. So I would say I definitely see an increase in their trend, in the gig economy trend, especially given the changing work styles between the millennial as well as the Gen Y population. So having said that, I do also want to cover something which you asked me to cover, Vinay, with respect to the whole Cisco's transformation in terms of what we went through with respect to workplace transformation. So we embarked on this journey of being able to evolve our entire workplace transformation here within Cisco. We started this journey about 3-4 years ago. So what we looked at is what was the type of workers who were actually coming into the office. So was it more remote workers or more office workers? So when we began this whole challenge, there were more people coming into the office across the board. And then we looked at the type of office spaces. So I talked about huddle spaces, which are these not these conference rooms, which are dedicated conference rooms, but they are informal places where people can actually huddle together. And we compared them against the conference rooms. And we saw that there was a significant number of conference rooms which were there in place. And last but not the least, we looked at the schedule, right? Like, were there an ad spaces linked together in these ad hoc collaboration spaces, or were they bookable collaboration spaces? And what we saw was that more than 50% of Cisco's 100,000 total seats were not actually being utilized. Employees were changing where and how they worked, which means that they wanted a greater amount of flexibility. And so we embarked on this journey in terms of pretty much changing the equation of the verdict in terms of reducing the number of office spaces in order to basically give flexibility to people given the emergent work style with respect to the millennial as well as the Gen Z population, so that we basically went from a huge tilt towards office towards a mid-tilt so that we can encourage both remote as well as office employees. And then we also changed the context of our large conference room. So we created a lot more huddle spaces rather than having inactive or not used conference rooms. And last but not the least, looking at the schedule, we actually went into more ad hoc collaboration spaces. So given that transformation, we actually had a tremendous amount of results which we gained with more productivity and satisfaction. So we had a 16% increase in employee engagement, 241 buildings were actually closed, 14% increase in workspace productivity, and close to 294 million earnings from building sales, and 811 million estimated value of incremental productivity, and a total decrease of 196 million for operational expense.
Absolutely, Aruna. As much as we'd love to continue with this, I think we're just at the
the hour. I'd just like to, leave the audience with a brief summary, just to say that, while automation is inevitable, companies will have to have a very strong problem statement and return on investment outline to incorporate this level of AI and automation, and the right investment into upskilling, of the existing workforce is critical to achieve that level of efficiency and productivity. I mean, the labor workforce will obviously be met by an aging workforce population, but employers must try to replenish this, shrinking talent pool and work towards, building and nurturing a cross-cultural, multi-generational workforce. And finally, if they are, to attract talent, they must work towards, shedding their hierarchical organization structure and take significant strides to, really enable a highly collaborative, flexible, and borderless and agile workforce. With that, I would like to hand it back over to Anna. Thank you so much, Aruna, and Charles and Gillian, for your wonderful perspectives. Anna?
Thank you to everyone. So this is going to conclude our session. So if you have any questions or would like to speak to our team, please send an email to any of the contacts that are provided on your screen at this time. Thank you for those that have joined, and enjoy the rest of your day.